Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education special meeting for October 14th, 2014. Can we begin with the roll call, please, Christine?
Yes, Mark Baird.
Present.
Leanne Charlotte.
Present.
Julie Gottschall.
Present.
Richard Haig.
Present.
Chris Letchinger present. John LaRosen.
Present.
Susan Ryder.
Present.
We have 7. We have a quorum. We can begin. Let's see. We're going to begin with, as we do every night, with the opportunity for public comment. If anybody would like to address the board prior to the meeting, feel free to do so. I'll let you know that we also have public comment period at the end of the meeting that people can address the board if questions arise during the meeting. If nobody would like to address the board, we will continue to item 3, which is a new item for us, the addition of a discussion item, something we're going to see on all of our upcoming agendas. Give board members the opportunity to add a discussion item during the meeting. And Jean and I think
It was
Julie
one of
might
our
wanna
policy meetings, we discussed that this summer. And it would be for discussion only for this meeting, or if it was something you wanted to add to see on the agenda for the next meeting, we could do it there too.
I just wanted to formalize that. I think it's a good idea.
So is that now?
And so if you have something you want to raise for discussion or for a future meeting.
Okay. Well, I have a question. Yeah?
Yeah.
So my question is, I think in the past you guys have given us an update on enrollment, just kind of change from last year and how the class sizes look. And I think we usually get that in September or maybe the first meeting in October. So I just want to touch base and see.
We'll do it for the October meeting as kind of a wrap up.
Okay.
Because that will also have the 6-day enrollment figures that are reported to the state on it.
Oh, okay. So you don't have that yet?
We do. I think I can email it to you, but
I mean, that's fine. I was just curious if that was holding it up.
And we also have ECRA doing an analysis of long-term
Like the
trends
long-term stuff.
in enrollment and staffing. That I think we'll see that in December. Is that the plan?
Yes.
Okay. I knew that was being worked on. I just was curious, like the
immediate numbers?
Yeah, it was kind of like change from last year because there's conversation about it in the community and things just go good.
The one thing that I'm trying to be very careful, so I'm glad you brought it up, it's a good point, is that we always use one reference point. So it'll be the difference between last year's 6-day enrollment versus this year's, because that's where some of the information has gotten muddy if we pick different comparison dates.
And I think what's confusing to people too is we have some differences in class sizes. So like in one class it's like 80 something, another that's over 100. And sometimes people see changes in staff to accommodate those cohorts moving through and think, oh, we're getting smaller in 4th grade, or we're getting bigger in whatever grade it is that big group is. So it's just good to update people. Thank you.
You will see it.
Okay, so we'll move on to discussion items, and the first one, A, is the GCA Services Group is going to present an overview of the maintenance and custodial work they've been doing for us.
Good evening.
Maybe.
Madam Superintendent, members of the board. My name is Dennis Thomas. I'm the Director of Business Diversity for GCA Services Group. My colleague Michelle Jones is the Senior Regional Manager for GCA. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to present just a few minutes. We know you got a tight agenda for this evening and a lot of other things, but I wanted to give you some of the highlights of what GCA, what we do, how we've been doing it in your district for the last 11 years, and how we continue to keep this partnership with the district. As far as what we want to do, I want to be able to explain a little bit about who GCA is, as far as the name, the company, where it came from, that whole thing, our team, the employees that make up the district, talk a little bit about green cleaning, safety, as well as some of the goals that we have, and then be able to answer any questions or concerns that the board that may have addressed it at that time. Our mission statement is all the same with a lot of the school districts. That is to maintain a clean, safe learning environment for the kids. We're glad that when we looked at the goals of Lake Bluff, that one of the things wasn't on there as far as cleaning was concerned, but we certainly make it a priority as far as the districts is concerned, as one of the #1 priorities, since that's something that's becoming very common in a lot of the school districts we see today. GCA, a lot of people think that stands for initials, It actually does. Some years ago, a gentleman by the name of Graham Crawford had owned GCA, his initials, Graham Crawford Associations. Blackstone Group, the private equity firm, bought GCA a year ago. Blackstone, $282 billion, bought this little company that was made up of many custodial companies, one in the South, one in the Illinois area, as well as one in California. And he formed GCA as a combined company to service over 300 school districts around the country, 70 higher ed universities, as we partner with around the country. 47 states. I'm still trying to get the area in Puerto Rico. I was even at the Virgin Islands because they're looking at it as well, and I was happy to volunteer to go and visit those locations as well. Our percentage of clientele with those 300, 94% is that relationship has been that long, and we're glad to say that Lake Bluff is also in that 11 years a part of that 94% as far as retention is concerned. Some of the school districts that we have here in Illinois, just to name a few, is quite a few, as well as the number of years as far as the relationship is concerned as well. It's a very high bidding process, and with 40 school districts that we have total here in Illinois, it becomes every single year a very competitive marketplace. But we try to, with what we do, continue to prove that we're the best, as well as keep that pricing, which it goes out every year as far as your recommendation for renewal, but every 5 years, renewal process starts that process to make sure that the numbers are the same. This joint review, we do a joint review committee with the board quarterly. And what we want to do is be able to say, hey, who is GCA or what are they doing? What are some of their highlights so that you'll know what's going on, as well as we would like to make improvements as well for when we get it from Jay or from a member of the board that has some concern, a concerned parent. We want to be able to address those concerns, look at the surveys to see, hey, how can we improve ourselves to make us better? Our team, Buddy Hilton, he's the president of the Education Division. Don Clark is our regional vice president. They left my name on here, so I don't know what I do. But Michelle Jones, she's basically the one that's running the entire district here as far as our team is concerned. But these individuals, including Mr. Murillo, does a very great job for us. So when we see that kind of leadership in our roles, it makes our job a whole lot better. There's a picture of him. We're going to get a better shot of him in a bow tie like myself. But does a great job here for us. As well as some of the other employees. The employees are the heartbeat of what GCA does. Without them, we can't do our job well, and we certainly appreciate their dedication and years of service that they've been working here in the district too. A few pictures of them as well. We do employee training. Joe, you want to talk about that a little bit?
This year during the summer, we held a summer food safety meeting. We took all the districts that we have in Lake County, combined everybody, and made sure that everybody was safe this year. We've also made sure that they were provided with the HAZCON and GHS. GHS is your Global Harmonized System, which is going to be the new SDS sheets, which is also your MSPU sheets. They're all going to be switched over in 2015 to GHS. That way, no matter where you're at in the nation or overseas, all of those sheets are going to be the same exact symbols, so everybody will know what kind of chemical that they're using.
You guys familiar with that? That used to be my old world. I know about
You do?
environmental engineers. So
Awesome. Okay. Actually, all the products, to the best of my knowledge, are at a 0 HMIS. The equipment that we use is an ionized water, so that we're cutting back on using harmful chemicals into the districts, especially if your new building that's a LEED building. So that's why we got those particular machines. You're using less chemicals. And again, like I said, I can't stress enough that those chemicals are at a 0 HMIS. We do a method of the week, which is a ongoing training throughout the year. Each week we pick a topic, and they're trained on that topic every week. Our green cleaning, GC remains the forefront. We have a proprietary and sustainable program that we put in place with all of our employees. Safety, again, is one of our main priorities. We want to make sure that those employees are safe. We perform quarterly safety audits. This year we started a program, which is the Safety Initiative Program. We gave employees that were promoting safety a $25 gift card. We're going to do that once a month to each employee that is promoting safety. Quality control. What we do is each month we give building principals report cards. We've asked them to fill it out. It's on a grading system. And if you want to flip to the next slide, this is the results that we had gotten in August. We had one meeting. That was a math room over at Lake Bluff Middle School. And we made sure that we attended to it immediately. This year, we've initiated a new GCA Clean program. What it is Omen will receive an iPad. It'll have your floor maps for each building on there, and he will do his inspection. So each room, he'll walk into a room, look at it, do an inspection, and it'll print out a report at the end of the week. It gives you, it lets you know that we're doing our job, and if there's things that need to be touched upon, we're going to get it taken care of immediately. And this will begin in October, and these are the reports that you'll get.
Who does the inspection?
Omen will, the night supervisor will have an iPad. He'll go through his buildings. We're making him do about 10 inspections a week.
He's part of your team.
Yes, that is correct. He's the night supervisor for the district.
He also works closely
For you
with
guys
both both building administrators.
Yes, that
He's
is
a
correct.
gem.
He is. Omen is definitely a gem.
He's
He's
a
correct. These are some of the areas that we cleaned this summer, and they're just some pictures that we like to show you. They did an awesome job. Okay, so that is our goals for discussion for the next RFC. We'd like to increase the principal and staff survey scores. We want to enable our employees to grow in skills and achievement, focus on training and safety, and continue to strive towards providing a clean, safe, and comfortable learning environment.
So we see a lot of the stuff that we may be doing behind the scenes while you're burning the midnight oil with taxes and levies and bonds and stuff like that. So as we appreciate the work that you do on that level, we just want you to know and wanted to see the name with the face that we're doing the very best that we can, and wanted to continue to keep contact with the board, because you get asked those questions as well at the conferences and everything. Who does your schools and those things? Wanted you to be able to confidently say that GCA Services is doing our schools, and they're doing a fantastic job. So we thank you so much for your time, and if there's any questions or concerns.
I have a financial question. Is it appropriate for that?
Mhm.
Think so?
I noticed in the board packet there was some information that indicated that there was overtime pay.
Yeah, that was my question.
How is that authorized? And give you a little feedback on how who authorizes the overtime and when is it required, and what's the process that it takes?
Sure, I guess from what I understand is Mr. Miller will ask our employees to stay after if there's a building that night that needs extra attention and cleaning. Or
Who's Mr. Miller?
setting up
Steve
security.
Miller.
He's our building
Facility
director.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Which is goes beyond their normal, work scope. So we'll ask them to stay and help with that cleanup.
And is that approved by Jay or Gene, or is that just something that
No, that's approved by Steve, but we've talked about it. And actually, you've seen it because this is the first year I've actually broken it out in the budget and in the financial report and separate accounts, so it's visible. Before it was all just lumped together. And so I looked back at last year, and there was a significant amount of overtime.
Yeah.
So I sat down with Steve to ask him to justify it. There was an issue with summer schedules, and we were really short-staffed, and we needed to get things done for school, so GCA was able to help us.
So that's incremental to the budgeted amount of money, correct?
I budgeted for overtime this year as well.
Okay.
So I put overtime for GCA in the budget, knowing that with our limited staff, we utilize them on some occasions for extra duties that we can't cover.
Was it like cleaning up after band concerts and things like that?
Any kind of activities that we have, at night or on the weekend. Now, organizations that use our Facilities during a weekend normally will pay the hourly fee for overtime, but that's not always the case. Oh, Jay doesn't.
Jay, you're getting evil-eyed. Use the speaker, the microphone.
Oh, sorry. It is more cost effective, in fact, to use GCA and versus overtime for our guys, just given the rates of pay and things that we have in place.
I also had, was that your question?
Well, I was gonna ask if you tied that bow tie himself, or did you clip it on?
Oh, no, I don't do clip-on. Well, and the reason why I use it in presentations because with some districts, they don't like making changes. And, you know, for guys, we've had long ties for a number of years. And then it's like, it's always hard to make a change. But I'm like, when you start to learn how to tie a bow tie, then to make that change, it's like, wow.
Without even looking,
That's pretty impressive.
It's the socks. You know, you gotta-
Actually, we're kind of used to the bow ties here in Lake Bluff because our middle school band teacher wears them all the time.
Oh, that's awesome.
His are not clip-on either, I asked.
I have a question. I see the total contract is worth $250,000, correct? How many FTEs is that?
There would be 6 FTEs and 1 night supervisor.
Okay,
So it's
in between
seven
the two
total.
schools.
7 total, that's correct. Between
Don't
the
they-
2 schools.
And they do some cleaning at the district office too,
That is
don't they?
correct, they do.
Okay.
They clean our offices
Four.
once a week.
So you have 4 at the elementary and you have 2 at the middle school, and then Owens who's back and forth between the 2. Your night supervisor.
I have a quick question, and this is hypothetical only. 7 years ago, all school districts in the state dealt with H1N1 epidemic, and it involved quite a bit of overtime for our custodians. If something like that were to happen again, and we had our own custodians, is that something we would work with you? Because I know that involved a lot of extra sanitation and cleaning measures.
We are trained on that, we're the experts on it. Yes.
And we would want to train your employees as well so that everybody's on the same page and know the protocols per the district that have been put in place along with what we would do.
And then my second question was for some of the awards that I'm reviewing for possibly applying for. We may need some of the data on the cleaning. Is that something I can get from you?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Leanne went quiet.
Well, since you mentioned me by name, I had a question similar to Dr. Sophie's about kind of infection and disease kind of stuff, because I have 2 young kids, and when I think of the schools, I think petri dish sometimes during that season. Does your company do things like disinfecting surfaces kind of regularly?
Absolutely, it's done on a nightly basis. That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Sound like my wife, she's like going around spraying Lysol everywhere. Because, I mean, let's face it, in the schools that scare us now as far as this crazy Ebola stuff that's going on right now, that's one of the things we have to keep an eye on ourselves as well, making sure that we're ahead of that curve before that spreads throughout, as best we can.
I mean, hopefully we're not addressing that problem, but
Absolutely.
even just influenza and the colds and stuff that go
Sure.
around, I was
It
curious
needs
if
to
you
be
guys...
amped up during the flu season, definitely.
So,
Wash your hands, can't stress it enough. It's your biggest defense.
and we get into the tax now.
Anybody else? Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you, appreciate it.
We appreciate that you for allowing us.
Okay, the next item we're going to talk about is B, the superintendent evaluation tool. And a couple weeks ago, we met, roughly. It was Christine and Julie and myself. We met and looked at the old evaluation tool that we all went through a little while ago when we did Gene's contract, and kind of critically went through it and decided that we wanted to make some changes. And we went to the IASB example superintendent evaluation tool, which was extremely thorough. And the more we looked at it, the more we decided that we kind of like that level of thoroughness. So that's what you see in your board packet is virtually not word for word, but very similar to the, straight from the IASB evaluation tool with some items taken out that were duplicative or we couldn't even understand what they were asking. And maybe Julie or Christine had some comment on that process that we went through, or with the superintendent evaluation tool?
Right. No, I think you've summarized it well. We sat down, we looked at a variety of models, including what we had used last year and what the IASB put out. And after looking at both, decided that we preferred the IASB approach, which is more or less what you see reflected here, with some points that we added that we thought were particularly important for this school district. So our thinking was we see the value in a comment section, but having so many enumerated items and things to consider, we thought really would help focus the whole process and give us an opportunity to give Jean some feedback in that more objective way as well. So that's how we came up with this.
And Jean was in that discussion, by the way. I don't think I said that, but Jean was part of that whole thing. We wanted to make sure Jean could work with whatever we ended up on, so she said she was okay with it. Anybody have any questions, concerns, or comments?
I just have one. When in looking it over, I know we added 5.2, which is the differentiated learning, because we thought that was something that the community was very interested in. I would just state it differently, like develop differentiated learning or something. It needs a verb. 5.2.
Yeah, but I'm not developing, I'm ensuring that we have differentiated
Right.
learning for all.
Okay, well, whatever the right verb is.
Just, I have a question. I'm used to seeing performance evaluations, and this begins out almost like a job description. I'm wondering how, for example, in part one, the assessment against superintendent performance to promote academic rigor would seem to me would be part of your job description as opposed to part of the evaluation process. And I'm sure, how do you differentiate that from later on where it becomes much more specific with respect to targets and goals and how they're achieved?
I'm not sure what the later on refers to, but I think, the fact that it reads like a job description, I don't necessarily take as a negative because we're evaluating her on how well she performs the functions of her job. I will concede, I think that there is, in its comprehensiveness, there is a little bit of redundancy that perhaps we could work to eliminate, but we, in the time that we had, this was as far as we got, but if people have further specifics to eliminate some of that, I think that
And we also did have the conversation too, and I think Christine made the point quite well a few times, was we wanted to kind of avoid things that were in the job description that Jean accomplishes just by showing up.
Right.
Jean kind of thought otherwise. She kind of liked the husband.
I liked it in those
She liked the slides.
But I'm sure there's some that could be further refined.
It's so extensive compared to what I'm used to seeing.
Yeah.
There's so much information here, and really part 3 is the one that gets very specific with respect to performance contract goals, where it specifies almost to be measured quantitatively what you're expected to achieve. Whereas prior to that, I don't know, it's kind of it talks about what your job is more than what you're expected to achieve first with respect to outcomes.
I'm
Just
guessing you've seen this, but in the past, Jean has given us then evidence for each of them. So even if the question looks kind of soft or subjective, we end up getting data that says, 6 meetings with the tri-board group and whatever the stuff is that actually happened. Does that help at all, or are you feeling like it's just too?
It's really a comment because I don't know how I'm going to promote academic rigor that focuses on learning and excellence. I hope that's what you said.
It's just circle 4.
Right. See, that doesn't really.
Well, John, I think that's a problem endemic to almost any time you evaluate a superintendent is how do you know what they do inside their buildings all day? It's kind of hard to. A lot of these are hard to address.
Well, no, it gets more specific in the performance standards later on. I think.
But there's a
In
mix
this
of
case,
things that
if
we
you
can't.
just flat out give I always feel that a performance appraisal should be a learning process, and you should walk away from it understanding how to improve whatever areas require improvement.
Agreed.
To tell you or to value you with respect to how you promote and understand and celebrate school community cultures is kind of hard to do. It's very subjective. And it's just a comment.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, we had that conversation.
We
I did
did.
exactly the
I'm
same.
sure.
Yeah. I wanted to simplify it, shorten it.
To your point, we do have that section on list things that the superintendent does best and list 3 things that the superintendent should work on. So she does walk out of there knowing things that she can improve on.
I would say that this, I don't know if this was intended to be the final product. This is a directional thing. So if people read through it, or even the first time if we use it as a group, we may say, we can eliminate 5.1 and 5.3 and combine, and let's add certain things that have been discussion points. So I would see this as somewhat of a work in progress. If people want to make those changes, I think that's a fair point.
It's a very thorough starting point, right?
Right.
And it covers every possible bit. And it's also something that is kind of, it may not be perfect, but it's something that our superintendent and other superintendents in the industry are very familiar with, because our professional organization has been promoting this across the state. And that doesn't make it the reason we should use it, but they're comfortable with it. So I agree with Julie too. It's a starting point.
So what, Mark, then is the process?
Well, we
Where
have
do
a
take it
follow-up
from
meeting
here?
that we're going to schedule another meeting, right? Where we can
Whatever,
whittle it down as we want. And we can hack as we want, or we can adjust it as we want if we had some time to think about it.
But perhaps everybody should send us suggestions
I think
of hacking.
that would be a great
I mean,
idea.
I wanted to combine a lot of stuff, but at the same time, when you start having a proposition where you have several elements, then it becomes very difficult to rate
Right.
effectively. So then we deal in minutia
Yeah.
a little bit, and so because it's a superintendent job description and not what you and I or most of us are used to, we err on the side of detail. The only thing that we talked about is that from Jean's point of view, right? Jean said, if you give me a 2 somewhere, at least do a comment so I know where the 2 is coming from, and I can address that, whether.
And to be honest, it also was a very time-consuming process. As we found ourselves thinking of ways to combine things and whittle it down, it often just became.
I was even doing some wordsmithing, which was scary.
Yeah.
And I was trying to stop her from that. It's scary, right?
To show it.
I mean, how does it seem to you? Because when I think about you putting together the evidence to support all these, having 52 different measures as compared with maybe, half that numbers that make it harder for you to go through the evaluation process?
You're looking at people that are going to be helping for their different areas.
Well, there's the goals at the end is what she's going to put them at. Put everything to support it. It's the stuff up front which gives her the detail on how to steer the course a little bit later on.
I think from my standpoint, the only concern I have is that best practice, you always have your evaluation before you start the year.
Right.
So you know what you're being evaluated on. And I'm being evaluated in February or March at the latest, and I still don't know what I'm being evaluated on besides my goals. So that's the only hard part for me.
And when you look at it, does it seem like enough of a change that, that concerns you?
I'm comfortable with the
You're
tool.
fine.
I don't think that's it at all.
Okay.
So I think that evaluations, for me as an educator, that's one thing I'm very careful with the people I evaluate, that they know what they're going to be evaluated on prior to the year starting.
So you'd rather use the old one and then implement the new one on the next evaluation?
There were a lot of unhappy people in the field when I don't know if I want that.
Yeah, a lot of the old one had the sentences where you were getting a 4 automatically because, as Jen was saying, showing up is, it's like, for me, and somebody brought this up, the tri-board meeting, just having the meeting doesn't mean that it's accomplishing, or we are accomplishing what we want to be accomplished. So there's the quantitative element and the qualitative element. And so when you read this, you will see that there is some stuff that it can be measured, but it doesn't mean that the goal is necessarily achieved. And then there is a qualitative element to it.
I think we can all agree that it could be whittled down to something a lot more efficient. But I think we can also give Gina a review that helps her become a better person using this tool.
Or superintendent.
A better superintendent. Sorry for the poor choice of words.
I thought I'd bail you out on this one.
A better, you know what I'm trying to say. We're starting to beat a dead horse here. I mean, we'll schedule another meeting.
Yeah.
Please, I'll ask that Jean send out a note to everybody saying that the 3 or 4 of us are going to have another meeting by a certain date. And if you have comments or specific suggestions that you'd like to forward on this, to forward us by another specific date a week ahead, and then we'll incorporate it all.
I'll just add that the tool can be any number of things, and what's really meaningful is the feedback.
Yeah.
So we ought to dispense with wordsmithing and adopt a tool that Gene's comfortable with, and then proceed to give meaningful feedback.
Yes.
Yeah, as long as, if we went through one of these, and I remember that if they're all not 4s, we have an upset person. And I have a hard time differentiating between a 3 and a 4, even a 2 and a 4 sometimes, when it comes to promoting academic rigor, for example.
We changed the rating too. I don't know if you realize that. That's something that they all brought up.
That was a very
We
deliberate choice
We
to
changed the
change.
rating.
Okay,
So now I have a different rating scale than the rest of the district is using.
okay.
Okay. So thank you for your work on this. It's fine.
John will expect a lot of
I
comments,
think it will be
a lot of feedback.
terrific.
You want me to redo it?
Sure.
No.
Give us your comments. Okay. Good. Move on.
Yeah.
We're now going to move on to item C, the first or beginning levy discussion, including fund balance discussion, which I assume Jay will lead us through.
Yes, with a microphone.
Yeah.
Okay. We've been working on projections and got the first cut at projections for next year, but I haven't really gotten a chance to go through them in detail. So I felt more comfortable discussing them at the next board meeting. What I wanted to go through tonight was more of a basic discussion, kind of Levy 101. It's a fairly complicated, it's actually not that complicated, but it's an opaque process that not a lot of people understand.
It's
well.
opaque. Not complicated, but opaque.
Yes. And
I'm
since
doing
you're
a
going
little wordsmithing here.
to have to make the decision coming up in December, I wanted to kind of cover the basics, go through it, and then give you my preliminary recommendation for December for this coming levy.
Jay, before you get started, so
Yes.
today we're just talking about the basics. The October 28th meeting, we're going to really talk about the basics and projections,
Mm-hmm.
and probably start taking a look at our actual levy. The plan would be that we vote on our tentative levy then at the November meeting, we only have one, and then vote on the actual levy in December, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so there'll be anywhere from 4 to 5 meetings on the levy.
Yeah, well, you'll be thoroughly tired of talking about it by December. But I'm in my last slide tonight, I've got a recommendation for the levy already that we can
To start
discuss.
thinking about it, okay.
So for the agenda, I'm just going to briefly review this year's budget, talk about give you some definitions, and talk about the timeline since the years are somewhat confusing, which year goes with which. So hopefully we'll get that straight. Go through the calculation of how we get to the levy, talk about best practices for providing tax relief to the community, and then give you my preliminary recommendation for 2014 for this coming December's tax levy. So this is the budget for this year.
Did Christine wordsmith this? 'Cause you got deficit there.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Typo. My spell check didn't catch that. Surplus or deficit. We don't have a deficit. Our budget is balanced for this year. And if you recall, the expenditures went up about 2% versus last year. Also, just as a reminder, we get about 90% of our revenue from local property tax. The levy discussion that we're having represents the vast majority of our education funding for the year. So now let me go through some terms. The tax levy is actually the amount requested by the governmental entity to be raised from property taxes. So the levy is just a request. We're just asking, hey, can we have the authority to get this much money? This request must be made by the last Tuesday in December, And at the time we make that request, we don't have all of the variables yet that are part of the formula for calculating the levy, so we're guessing at some of them. The levy is usually for the subsequent year. Taxes in Illinois are 1 year in arrears, and it's based on a formula. The tax extension is the total amount that's actually billed to the taxpayers. So the levy is the request, the extension is what we actually pay, or actually collect. EAV stands for Equalized Assessed Value. This is a term that will be thrown around a lot. It sounds a little bit complicated, it's kind of a mouthful, but if you break it down into its parts, at its base is the assessed value. Property in Illinois is assessed at 1/3 its market value by statute, everywhere except for Cook County. And then they look at all the different assessments. So it's assessed at the township level, and then there's steps put in place to make sure that all the assessments are fair, because assessment is somewhat subjective. We have the county goes in and applies an equalization factor. It looks at all the different townships within its county and makes sure that there's no bias, that everybody is being assessed fairly. And then the state steps in and looks at all the different counties and also applies an equalization factor. So that's where the equalized part of the term comes from. So it's the equalized assessed value is what is important for taxes.
Is there a specific reason why they go with 1/3 or just?
It's arbitrary. I think in Cook County it was different by type. So commercial property would be assessed at a different rate than residential property. And that actually changed several years ago and caused a big redistribution of tax burden and caused some issues in Cook County. But it's just an arbitrary level that they have set.
Whether it's commercial or.
Right. All property is assessed at 1/3 its market value. And then the other variable in the formula is CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. And this is a measure of inflation. It's kind of the measure of the value of a basket of goods. So the CPI that we use in the tax cap formula is the All Urban Consumer Price Index, and it's arguable whether or not that is the right measure of inflation to use. Most school district expenses are salary and benefits, so CPI may or may not capture or reflect the increase in what the cost that school districts primarily see. But that's what we use.
But that's dictated.
That is dictated as part of the
It's
formula.
not optional.
Then the tax cap. The tax cap is, people know it as the tax cap. It actually doesn't cap taxes. The more appropriate term is the Property Tax Extension Limitation Act, which is a lot harder to say, so people say tax cap, but really what the law does is it limits your increase in taxes. And it was put in place in 1999 as a response to rapidly rising assessment or property value. And so if your property value was going up at a much higher rate than inflation, this law was intended to reduce that or slow the growth in property taxes. The way it's designed is, it actually kind of makes sense. It's designed to provide a school district the same amount of money every year to operate in real terms. So they take what you need to operate last year and they grow it by the CPI, and then they allow you to tax new property. The assumption being that new property brings new students. So you need what I had last year adjusted for inflation, plus any money to compensate me for increased student population.
Can I just ask one clarifying question on that?
Sure.
Is it actually the amount of money it took to operate in the prior year, or the amount of money levied, the tax extensions from the prior year plus CPI?
It is the tax extension. So as you rightly point out, and it's the limited extension, so it's the operating funds that you're allowed to levy, not the non-limited like debt service funds.
Okay.
But so if there is a flaw in the formula, and you could look at it in different ways. Many communities are struggling to raise enough money in property taxes, and because the CPI measure does not reflect their costs, cannot levy incrementally each year to cover their rising costs.
Right.
You may have a situation,
Behind more and
so
more.
they keep falling behind more and more.
Conversely,
Conversely, in Lake Bluff,
right.
so first of all, if you start off with a surplus and then you grow it every year, you're
Right.
propagating that surplus and building up fund balances. Or if you have property increases that are not tied to new students, you're getting tax money from all this new property and your costs aren't increasing. So that's another way you can continue to, year after year after year, levy or extend more in taxes and build up a fund balance. There is some legislation out there that says if EAV goes down, that you don't get your CPI increase, which it's not moving forward in the legislation, but it doesn't make a lot of sense because EAV and your costs aren't really related to each other. EAV, as I will describe in a minute, is just a means by which to allocate your tax burden fairly across property, but it doesn't have anything to do with how much it costs to run your school. So to say, if your EAV goes down, I'm not going to allow you to increase your taxes doesn't
Makes sense.
make sense.
And all this works relatively well unless they pass Senate Bill 16.
Well, then,
Talking about
I know.
yeah, then you have you have costs that you have to
Try to recover.
try to recover that may not be anticipated. So you need to allow yourself some flexibility in your ability to levy. And then lastly, the tax cap or the PTEL is not all taxing bodies are limited. So if you're a home rule taxing body, you don't have a PTEL limit. So an example of a home rule would be the Village of Lake Bluff. Any county or local municipal government that has an elected official is not bound by this law. They can levy what they need. We talked a little bit about new property, and new property is property that basically has not been on the tax rolls before. So it can be newly built property, it can be if you did a renovation on your home and it was assessed at a higher amount. It also includes expiring tax increment financing districts. There are none in Lake Bluff. A tax tax increment financing district is where they set aside if there's an area they want to improve, they basically freeze the value, and they say any incremental taxes that we would have gotten from the increase in value is going to be frozen, and people use that to secure debt service. And so they basically issue bonds and pay for the bonds to improve the property with its future tax revenue. And then those usually last, about 20, on average about 24 years. So it can be a long-term deal. And when those expire, they come off the TIF, and it's a big slug of new property that gets taxed by the district. But we don't have any, we're a fairly small community, we don't have any of those in our books. So now here's the big slide that to go through.
Jay, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you anticipate any of those with the development that's happening in 176? I know there's been some conversation about that in the community.
You mean the Target one?
Target or other, yeah,
No,
not.
you wouldn't have a TIF for a commercial development like that. It's more for, it's used in areas of blight.
Okay, so it's only for residential properties. It wouldn't be used for commercial.
Not generally, because a company would come in and pay for the land and develop it for its own profit. You wouldn't. This is more of a way to give an incentive to somebody to develop an area where there is no economic incentive otherwise.
Okay.
And it gets overused a little bit. Like in Chicago, they use it a lot, and school districts don't like it because it basically takes property away, tax money away from them to do some private.
I think that people are referring to the tax break that was given to Target, and that's on the sales tax, not the property taxes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
So this is kind of a timeline of the whole cycle, and we'll start off, so it's a pretty long cycle as you can see. It starts back in 2013. The CPI that's used
in the formula is the change in CPI as of December of 2013. So it's the change from December of 2012 to December of 2013, which we currently know. That was 1.5%. So that's the CPI that we use in the formula. The property value used in the formula is the equalized assessed value for 2014 as of January 1st. So a property value is the value as of this date. And this is based on the prior 3 years of comparable sales. So it takes into account sales from 2011, 2012, and 2013 to kind of smooth out the effect of market fluctuation. So when we had the big real estate collapse, that was just in 1 year. We still had 2 years of inflated property values to kind of average in and soften that. So the effect is that it doesn't move as fast, and there's also a lag. So as property values are declining, if they decline all at once, it takes several years for you to see the true impact of that property decline. And the opposite is also true. As property values start coming back, it's delayed, and we don't see the rise in property values reflected in the tax formula as quickly as we do in home prices.
Yeah, there's also another element that I found out is that you may have some substantial increase in property value, but the number of sales is not big enough to be statistically relevant. Mm-hmm. So they actually cannot take that into consideration. And they need a certain critical mass to take this increase.
Yeah. And they also only use arm's length transactions. So
right.
In this recent history, if there's lots of short sales, those don't get counted. The property values as of 2014, January 1st. We filed the tax levy in December of 2014. So this is when we have to decide how much money we want to ask for and submit that to the county. And then in the spring, we get our final tax rates. So we don't find out until end of March what the actual assessed value was way back on January 1st. And so that's when we find out what our assessed value was and how much our new property is worth. It's also the date when any abatements are due. So we can ask for money in December and then come back in March and say, we asked for all this money, we want to actually take less. And so we have another opportunity in March to come back and reduce our extension. We can't ever extend more than we levy, we can always extend less than we levy. Taxes are then collected in June and September of 2015, and we defer all of our June taxes into this fiscal year. So basically all that revenue is revenue for the 2015-2016 school year. So as we sit here today in October, we're going to file the levy in December based on all the property values using the 1.5% CPI. And we'll get our money next year in 2015, and it will actually count as our revenue for the 2015-2016 school year.
And in September of 2015, we'll do the budget
for the following year. Correct. Okay, so that how are taxes used? We basically levy taxes for two purposes. We have a debt service levy and an operating levy. The debt service levy is not limited; it's not subject to PTEL. This levy provides the principal and interest for debt that's already been issued. And when we issued the debt, we had voter approval to levy whatever or extend whatever taxes are required to pay the debt service. So we've already gotten that authority, and every year the clerk automatically levies whatever is needed to fund the debt for that year. Within the tax cap formula, there's also what they call a debt service extension base, which basically says that any debt service payments that you were making in the year that the law went into effect, you can continue to levy those debt service payments out every year forever without referendum. So if you happen to have a lot of debt on your books when the law was passed, you technically have the authority to issue bonds, and you can pay for those bonds out of your debt service extension base and not have to ask the voters for approval.
So you can actually sort of roll over. I mean, let's say there's like $20 million in bonds and they're paid off, but you can still levy on this and issue new bonds.
If,
So the
if it's
backdoor
within,
referendum.
if it's within your debt service extension base.
Right.
It's not, so the current debt we have outstanding that we had approved by referendum, once that's paid off, that's it. We have no authority to issue more. But the district does have, I think, and I asked for the number, I should have written it down, several $100,000 a year of debt service extension base. So if we had the need to issue debt for building purposes or other reasons, we could do it without going to referendum. I think it's like, I want to say, I calculated roughly $4 million worth of debt based on the debt service payments. And again, it's the payment, how much you have to pay every year that's in your base. So depending on the interest rate and the term of the debt would determine how much.
So in fact, that sort of modifies the discussion about the reserve, because that would be a possible source of fund, correct?
That is a source of funds. You just as a board would need to decide if you wanted
Policy,
to
whether we want to do it that way
issue
or we
debt
want.
without
Right.
asking the voters
Yes.
for approval.
Yes.
But you could use that for operating expenses, could you?
Yeah, you could
You could?
issue working cash debt, any kind of debt, as long as it's within the
That's
debt service
interesting.
extension base.
And that,
So
that
let's-
continues forever.
Correct. Actually, it grows by CPI, so you get every
So
year
we compound.
a little bit more.
So let's just clarify that this is a conversation we're having to learn about our options, not to plan for any future.
Right, I'm just teaching about
Absolutely.
pizza. Most debt does require a referendum, and most debt service extension bases are rather small, so if you wanted to do something substantial, you would need voter approval for that. And then your total debt that you can issue is limited by statute for elementary and high school districts to 6.9% of your equalized assessed value. And they take some percentage of your property wealth as a measure of the community's ability to pay debt service.
And what is that absolute number for us?
Right now, we are at about 50% of our total statutory limit. So I think it's about $40 million, and we have about $20 million outstanding. This chart represents by levy year how much our debt service payments are scheduled to be. And so we have the authority to levy this much annually in debt service extension. We are right, so this year would be 1355. And so it will go up next year, and then we'll level off at about $2 million a year.
The board worked really hard to get that to a point that it would be level, because it was not level when we looked at projections a year and a half ago. Worked really hard to get there.
The other larger portion of your levy is your operating levy. The operating levy is limited by the tax cap formula by PTEL. The only way to really increase your operating levy is through referendum. This money includes capital funds and life safety funds. So if we were doing our 10-year life safety study, if many things come back requiring attention, we would need to pay for that out of our current levy funds or out of our reserves. But we can issue more debt outside of a referendum otherwise.
Can you give an example of a life safety expense?
Sprinklers.
Yeah. So if they come in and say something in your building doesn't meet code, you need to fix it.
Okay.
You have 10 years, or you have a certain amount of time in which to fix it.
Thanks.
Also, I haven't pointed out that what I'm talking about here is the district's tax levy. There are 231 taxing bodies in the state of Illinois, and we overlap with about a dozen of them. So on the tax bill, we only account for about 40% of a Lake Bluff residents' tax bill. So the money we're talking about here is 40% of their tax bill just reflects our spending.
But that is, as many Lake Bluffers will point out, the single biggest item on their tax bills.
Yes, well, that's 40%, almost half.
Is that typical with most communities?
Yes, the schools are far and away their largest expense.
So is it generally 40% or is it all less than that?
It depends. Like if you're in a unit district where you've got both elementary and high school, it will be higher because here there's the Lake Bluff Elementary District plus
Yeah,
the
you have to
Central
actually
District.
I guess
think of
my
it
question
combined.
is the education portion of it pretty consistent throughout the state.
Yeah, I would,
60%.
at least in this area, I won't speak for downstate Illinois, but I'd say maybe even be higher down there. You know, the other things that we pay for, fire department, mosquito abatement, sanitary districts, those municipalities tend to be less expensive than school districts or require less, a smaller operating budget. So it's not unusual. Who pays the taxes? So we've talked about how much it costs to run a school district, and we figure out how much money we need, and we grow the extension by CPI, and we account for new property, and then we have to send out the bills. So really, equalized assessed value is a way to distribute the tax burden on an even basis to all property in the district. Lake Bluff's district is made up primarily of residential property. There's about 8% commercial property, 3% of industrial property, a little bit of other stuff, but mostly residential. And every property represents a tiny slice of the tax pie. So how are my taxes calculated? We take the prior year's extension, and I'll just repeat it. We grow it by CPI to get the next year's extension, and then add new property.
That's if you automatically increase it by CPI.
That's the limit, right? So that's how they set the limits. You don't have to tax all the way up to your limit. If I look at, so the total taxes on existing property don't go up by more than CPI. So in general, I take my total taxes, I increase them by CPI, and those are on my existing property only that I'm talking about. So how do I calculate my tax rate? My tax rate is calculated by taking my total tax extension and I divide it by my EAV to get my tax rate. And then I take that tax rate and I go back and I apply it to every property in the district to give them their fair share of the taxes. So as my property value goes down, my tax rate's going up. But
we don't control the tax rate.
We don't control the tax rate.
So it's
the
a
tax
moot
rate
issue.
is an output, not an input. The tax
What
rate
really-
is just used to distribute the taxes.
Right, so what really matters, for comparison's sake, is how much we're levying this year as opposed to the year before. The tax rate is a bit of a, there's all sorts of factors that come into play.
Right. I think that's an important point here, is people tend to focus or fixate on their tax rate. But the tax rate is a lot less important than what your tax bill is. I mean, I care about how much I have to write my check for, not what my tax rate is. Property assessment can actually be a bigger driver in your taxes. So as I said earlier, in total, taxes on existing property never go up by more than CPI. But that's assuming that all the slices of the pie stayed the same. If your slice of the pie got bigger, and then you will be absorbing more of the tax burden, your taxes go up by significantly more than CPI. So your taxes might go up by more than CPI if your property value increased more than everyone else's property value increased. Your property value decreased by less than everyone else's property value decreased. Or if there's a big change in the ratio of commercial and industrial property to residential property. So large retailer leaves town, large retailer enters town, say Target. We get a lot of tax objections. People, large large landowners have the means to hire attorneys and protest their taxes. And if they're successful, they're essentially shifting the tax burden from them to everyone else. So that's what, so again, if you have this one little slice of.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Do we monitor this at all?
Yes.
Okay, because we had a history, I don't know if you guys know about this, the church and there was a fairly substantial amount of money, and it cost the school a great deal of money, and the village and other taxing body decided to litigate it. But it's something that we have to monitor because we can actually stop. This was clearly a case of fraud.
Well, and that's a slightly different, I think, issue. I don't know all the details, but if it's someone claiming exemption,
it's a nice story. I'll tell you.
It's the same kind of thing where they want to remove themselves from the tax rolls and make their burden
yeah, basically
zero.
that's what they did.
And so they're claiming that they're non-profit and they shouldn't be paying taxes.
But the cost to the school, I think at the time, was something like $12,000 or $14,000. It was not a negligible amount.
We get notified of any objections over a certain threshold, and we have an attorney who argues them for us. So also just last word about tax rate. Again, I think we've already determined that tax rate's not that important. But it's very reflective of your community. So as I was answering Richard's question about the kind of proportion of money that you spend on schools, it costs about the same amount of money to run a school district, no matter where you are, per student, within a range. What impacts your tax rate more is your commercial and industrial base, so how much money is being paid for by business, how much money is being paid for by state and federal government, so are we 90% property tax district or are we 40% property tax district? And then what really drives your tax rate is your EAV per student. So if you look at, I just took a quick example, Lake Bluff versus Lake Forest. I think people look at these two districts and say, this is not going to happen. I'm sorry, I got the data at the last minute, so
I was looking for this. It's a very nice slide.
But the tax rate, people will look at our tax rate at almost $2.50, and then look at Lake Forest tax rate of $1.40 and say, well, we should live in Lake Forest because it costs a lot less to run schools. But if you actually look at the numbers, the assessed value, total assessed value for 2013 for Lake Bluff was $565 million. For Lake Forest, it was $2.1 billion. So they're significantly bigger than we are. Their levy is $30 million, and ours was $13 million. And if you take the average tax bill, which is basically just the levy divided by the average property value, the tax bill is about the same. The average property...
Is the average property value the same in both places?
No, the average property value in Lake Forest is more.
Right.
Multiplied by the lower tax rate gives you the same tax bill. So
because it's equal.
If you lived in Lake Forest, and also the value of your house is dependent on where it is. So if your house was in Lake Forest, it might be worth more, and then you'd be charged a lower tax rate, but you'd still be paying the same amount of taxes. Makes sense.
But these are slides we're going to need to make sure that go with the presentation when we post them.
But I don't see cost per student up there anywhere.
So your taxable value per student is higher in Lake Forest than it is in Lake Bluff. And I tried to look at different variables. So like, are there more houses without kids in Lake Forest that are subsidizing the houses with kids? And that's not the case. Every fourth, there's one student per every 4 houses in both communities.
Yeah, because they have the same demographics.
They have about the same demographics there. They have about 90% residential, 94% or 88%. So the average property value in Lake Forest is $285,000. In Lake Bluff, it's $164,000.
Is that assessed?
Yeah.
Assessed, right?
Assessed value, so multiply by 3.
Yeah. Well, that's a substantial difference because
Yeah.
they are actually, Lake Forest is a lot more even as far as residential property. I mean, the range is less because we have Norwood in the mix.
Right, so if you look at it, there's,
Think about the sanctuary.
there's more houses in Lake Forest that are high value houses. So if you're thinking about just the average homeowner, maybe a young family with kids, if they're living in a house that has the same value and they're in Lake Forest, there may be houses in Lake Forest that are more $1 million houses that are absorbing more of the tax burden, and the lesser value houses are paying less of the tax burden. So I didn't mean to derail this, I just wanted to make a point about tax rate, because I hear people talking about their tax rate and not thinking about it.
It would be interesting to add to this the cost per student, and also to look at similarly valued home in one versus the other and what that tax bill is. Because when you say, well, the average, that's really hard to.
Well, I mean, so the cost per student is about the same. I didn't show it here, but it's, I think it was 15,000 something in Lake Forest and 17,000 something in Lake Bluff. So the point being that the cost per student.
That's a $2,000 difference.
It is, but if you're looking at, that's not going to drive a difference in your tax rate of 75%.
Correct.
So it's not, and when I say it costs about the same to educate a student, you'll see ranges from 9,000 to
Right.
10,000 to 20,000, but that's a big difference per student, but it's still not going to drive the type of changes in your tax rate that we're talking about here. And I have to use the average home or the average assessment value. If you're saying a comparable home, again, that same house, if you picked it up out of Lake Bluff and put it in Lake Forest, might be worth a different amount.
I get that, but I didn't say the same home. I said similarly valued property.
Well, if similarly the valued property would, you'd have a difference in your tax bill by the difference in your tax rates.
And that's the point, yeah, right. That's the point that people object to.
But if you lived in Round Lake, where I worked before, their average tax rate is $6 or $7 per student or per 100, because their houses are worth significantly less. So it's not. It's not really what you're looking at is how much does it cost to run a school? Our community has a school, and we need to distribute that cost amongst our houses in our community. So that's really what you want to look at versus one. It's very difficult to
Tax rate
compare
is a
one community versus
manipulation, the
another.
number to get the numbers you want eventually to run the school.
Numbers you need to run the school.
Right, yes. You need, yes.
Okay, so how do we tax new property? New property is taxed by basically taking the tax rate that we just calculated and multiplying it by the value of the new property. So we remove the new property when we calculate the tax rate, and then we add it back in, and all of that property is incremental tax to the school district. So what districts do oftentimes is, because when they're levying or requesting their tax dollars in December, they don't know how much new property they're going to have, but you can never extend or collect more in taxes than you levy, so they overestimate or estimate on the high side. We want to make sure that we charge all of this new property the same tax dollars as everybody else, so we're going to assume that we're going to make sure that we estimate high, because they're going to cut us off and not allow us to tax any more than the limit anyway. But if we tax less than the limit, then that's all we get. So that oftentimes, sometimes people will call it balloon levy, or to not leave money out there, or to not be able to utilize as much of your taxing authority as possible, they'll calculate how much they think they're going to get between existing property and new property, and then ask for a little bit more, because they know that they're going to be backed off to the limit, and if they ask for too little, then they're only going to get what they ask for.
But arguably, since you're taxing, if you're doing the levy based on the past, you can call the assessor and say, what is the new property?
Well, it's just, what building permits have been issued. The question is, how much is that new property going to be valued at? And you don't know what your existing property is going to be valued at either, because you have an estimate based on the assessor, but then you have state and tax, or state and county equalization factors that get applied.
All right.
And
But historically, if you look back at the number for us, What has it been, like, I'm just guessing,
It's been about $3 million a year, between 3 and 4. of new
which
properties.
translates itself in how much dollars?
I'll give an example at the end of what it would be for next
All
year.
right,
But
okay.
it's probably $100,000.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, 120, yeah, something like this. Yeah.
Are you just basically saying you would calculate your levy without regard to what new property may be coming, and you calculate that based on PTEL or whatever below PTEL you might need to run the district, and then if in the spring you find out that X number of dollars of new property is coming on, then you could back off that amount. Is that
You're putting your levy request in December
right?
for all property, including new property.
Including new property.
And so, because you don't know how much it's going to be, if you are worried about taxing as much as you statutorily can, you'd want to overestimate your new property so as not ask for enough.
I think I understand.
Wouldn't you underestimate the new property?
No,
No, because you're getting to
because then you would raise possibly less than you could raise.
Right. So just to use an extreme example, if you had no new property, you asked for $100,000 worth of new property, you still wouldn't get any. But if you asked for 100 and it was really 200, you'd only get 100.
Got it.
So you want to ask for 200 just in case. If you get anywhere from 0 to 200, you're getting exactly what it is. But
If you're trying to raise the maximum.
if you're trying to raise the maximum. So my order didn't come in correctly, but so we've so far I've been talking about the limits and the statutory maximums, and I think as a board you've decided that we want to levy what we need, and we want to in some cases reduce our levy and give money back to the community. The base year is usually the prior year, so everything is based on the prior year, growth off the prior year. But what happens if you're in a situation where you have your tax, your base year, and then you decide to levy $2 million less, and you drastically reduce your levy the next year, which is what we did. If this rule held fast and you were only allowed to levy incrementally over what you levied the prior year, you'd be out $2 million a year forever.
Right.
So in the law, they also have a rule that says that if you decrease your aggregate extension versus the prior year, they'll allow you to go back and use as the base year the highest of the prior 3 years extensions. So you're able to go back and recapture those taxes. So it doesn't hurt you to reduce your taxes in 1 year.
So we did it for 1 year.
So we
So
did it
our
for 1
base year in December 14 will be 12? What is the base? Or is it 11?
I will show you this at my next
Okay.
slide. This provision is only good for the first year, though. So after the year that you reduce your taxes, you're allowed to go back 3 years. But then after the next year, you can't continue to go back. The next year is pretty much fixed unless you lower it again.
That's the new base.
Becomes the new base year. And we're still talking about operating levy, not debt service levy here. So the debt service is separate. We are able to levy for 100% of our debt service.
So is it possible to think that strategically one would choose to abate the taxes, let's say, every 5 years? So you could, I'm you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to get around.
You wouldn't do it 2 years in a row.
You would not do it 2 years in a row because then that messes you up.
Well, and if you could do it 2 years in a row because you could go back.
But not 3.
But not 3.
You'd only do it if you had a surplus, though.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So, that would drive whatever abatement you're going to
Right.
term, so.
Yeah, so here's an example. This is actually our data. So this was our 2010 levy. This was our 2011 levy. This was our 2012 levy. So we were up at $15 million for our operating levy in 2011. 2012 we dropped to 13 million. So now if we were limited to our growth versus our prior year, this would be what we could extend every year after that. But we're able to go back to this year, which is the highest of the last 3 years, and use that as our base year. And so now in 2013, we're allowed to levy, again, $15.2 or $3 million in operating funds, and that continues every year.
So that was in 2013.
So that was,
So what did we actually?
so what we actually did in 2013 was this. So now we've got a situation where we're high, low, mid. And if we had levied the max, we really were, what our limit would have been had we not levied this much in 2013, was we would still be up here in terms of our authority or ability to levy. But because we levy down here, we can't use that money, and our new limit has been established at 13 million. So that going forward is the limit, the levy limit every year after.
So it would have been better to abate the debt.
2 years in a row.
And I'll make that point in my next
Yeah,
section.
because then you're losing a compounding effect here,
Right. So here we
which over the years is problematic.
you have to be careful when you abate your operating levy, because once you
Yes.
reduce it, you lose that ability to tax forever, and you can only get it back by referendums.
Right.
So when providing tax relief to the community, there are basically 2 ways. You can reduce your operating levy or reduce your debt service levy. Christina's already a little bit ahead of me. I would, in general, always reduce your debt service levy before your operating levy. And this is an example, again, these are our numbers. This is our debt service levy, the blue is our operating levy, and this represents what our statutory maximum is at the time. So in 2013, we could have levied up to this much. We decided we wanted to reduce the levy, so we ended up levying about $15 million. But what we did was we only levied 14 of operating, and then we levied our full debt service levy. So what that means is that in the following year, our operating levy is capped here because we're growing our operating levy, and we're still getting our full debt service levy. So this is scenario A. This is one way to reduce your levy, and this is what we did. Scenario B would be to abate your debt service levy, and so you can't really see the black box here, but we could have levied our operating levy at $15 million and made it all operating levy and levied no debt at all. We could have abated 100% of our debt service levy, transferred the money from ed to debt service, and paid all of our debt service out of the operating levy.
Yep.
And what that would have done was it would have meant that our limit for this year would have been $15.4 million in operating, plus we'd be allowed to levy the debt service on top of that. So we've essentially lost this much of future debt levy authority. And I'm not saying that
Which we knew.
I'm not saying we should always levy the max, but because of things like Senate Bill 16 and the pension cost shift and the contract negotiations and all of these uncertainties in our future, you want to preserve as much flexibility as you have to levy what you need without having to go for a referendum, because a referendum is very time consuming, it's very expensive, it's a distraction from providing education to students.
That's why looking at the fund balance and projecting out over the next 5 years with whatever knowledge we have is such an important exercise.
Right.
Because otherwise you either get way out of line like we were with respect to fund balance, or you're underfunded.
Right.
You don't
So,
want to go either.
We're really balancing out. That's what we're trying to,
Right.
that was the goal.
so here, in 2014, we would have had the ability to tax anywhere between 16 and 3/4 and 14 million. And so this would have given us a lot more flexibility to levy what we needed, and then if we abated our debt service versus our
But
operating.
it also would have resulted in higher taxes to our residents.
Not necessarily.
No, because you've abated instead of abating the operation, you would have abated the debt.
You would have abated the debt because
So-
He's just talking about the authority right now,
Yeah,
not,
right.
Yeah,
not
that's-
the actual.
right. If you look here, the tax rate in 2013 is the exact same. Whether you do your operating levy plus the debt, or whether you do all operating. As a taxpayer, all I see is the bill. I see one number, and I don't know the difference whether it's debt service or operating. So it's completely transparent for me, one way or the other. I'm ambivalent. But as a district, we could have in 2013 received the same tax dollars from the community, and then had more flexibility in the future to set the taxes at what we need, and not over and above
But in
what we
that
need.
particular year, our fund balance would have gone up.
Not
We
necessarily.
had to go somewhere.
Well, no, I'm not suggesting that we levy
Gone
this
to the
amount.
debt,
I'm
it
saying
would have
that
gone to
We
debt.
have the ability to levy, and instead we would abate the debt service. So we could still have paid our entire debt service levy out of operating funds and
Yeah.
only levied, much less. So when providing tax relief, the rule of thumb is always abate your debt service levy first, because it isn't limited, and reduce your operating levy last, because it is limited, and once you reduce it, you can't get it back. So,
You can only get it back to the extent that the CPI increases.
right, over time, and to the extent that you have new property.
Right. So I appreciate the way in which it's been laid out because it's very clear. But this isn't new news. I guess it's laid out in a new way, but we, I think, knew that we were to some extent making a decision that was going to carry into the future.
This is all information we went through last year.
So this shouldn't be new. This, I'm sure, was explained, the same stuff was explained just in a different way.
Right.
And so I'm just trying to kind of make sure I have the foundation of knowledge to go forward. And then, so my recommendation is, or I guess just to look at the 2014 levy, I'm going to go through the variables first. Our 2013 CPI, as I said, is 1.5%. That's what we know today. We are allowed to grow last year's operating levy by 1.5%. Last year, the number was 1.7%. Year to date through, I don't have the October numbers yet, through September, we're around 2% for next year, or the following year.
So what you're
Yeah,
saying
but
is
the
we
bond
should
market is saying it's more like it's gonna be 1.5%.
Well, it just depends on what the inflation numbers are for
Right.
last quarter, right?
So no matter what budget we come up with, we should levy that 1.5, and to the extent we don't need all of that, we should take it out of debt service.
That's my
That's it.
recommendation.
That's it.
Because
Yes.
because we can,
We do
what we
not
ask
wanna-
for now, we don't have to levy, or we don't have to extend.
Right.
We should ask for as much as possible, and then when we have more information about what property values have done, what money we can actually get, and what our budget looks like, then we can decide how much to actually levy in March or April. when we have
And
the
I
ability to
think
levy.
what you're saying is how much to actually levy, where we would take it from would be
The
the
debt
debt
service, correct.
Okay.
Right. Now, we also have gotten to a point where we've reduced our levy to about what we need to operate. So
Right.
Which was
we may need to levy the maximum allowed, because if our expenses are growing at 2 or 3% and the CPI is 1.5 or 2%,
Right.
we may not even be able to keep up with our current
Right.
expenses. It just depends on how much money we get from new property. EAV, I'm projecting to decrease by about 1%. Last year, existing property decreased 5%. Net was about 5%.
I just read an article, Lincolnshire stayed the same for the first time in a long time.
Mhm.
So they're still predicting ours is gonna go down?
That is just my projection,
Just
and
3
it's
years
based-
back, you still have data from 11 in that number, right?
right. So this is right off the county assessors, or the website, the Illinois County Assessors website. They basically, it's all laid out. It's in there by June of 2014. All the different townships. This shows you the assessment values for 2011, 2012, and 13, which our numbers are based on. And as we said, statutorily, 33.3% of market value is what our assessed value should be. if your assessed value is higher than 33.3%, you need to lower your assessed value in order to bring it back in line with that 33.3 number. So anything above 33 and a third represents a reduction. They'll apply a multiplier to reduce the assessments to bring it back to 33.3. So so if you look at 2011, it was a reduction of about 1% of property value. I think that works out to minus 0.9%. 2012 is, this is a big number. We lost 5% property value in 2012. 2013, now we're dipped below 33, and this represents about a 4% increase in value. So in 2013, property values in Lake Bluff increased by 4% on average. But because we're averaging the last 3 years,
That's what's pulling us down.
the net multiplier is still 0.991, or a reduction of 0.8%, almost 1%. So just based on those numbers, I'm predicting a small decrease. Now these numbers still need to be equalized by the county and by the state. So I don't know for sure, but that's what I would plug into my levy calculation formula. And then new property has been between 3 and 4 million with every year, with the exception of the 2010 year, I think, where it was 1.5. So I'm estimating about 4 million. And so my recommendation, which we've sort of already talked about, is maximize the 2014 levy under PTEL and levy as much as possible. The reason is because our 2013 levy was reduced to the basic level we need, so we really actually need to levy now. Levying to the max sounds bad, but really we're increasing it by CPI, which is kind of where we need to be. We're no longer propagating previous surpluses. We've had the correction where before we were levying surpluses every year and increasing the levy every year and banking those surpluses. Now we no longer have that surplus built into our levy. And then lastly, CPI is only 1.5. The growth under the law net with new property is expected to be just over 2%. And I would expect, our salaries and benefits are 70% of our operating expenses, and those have a good chance of growing at least 2% next year. And then we also have the opportunity to kind of come back and reevaluate things. What we levy in December is not the final say in our taxes. We can come back in March when we know exactly how much money we are going to get and exactly how much money we need, or a pretty good idea of how much money we need, and then we can abate our taxes to just take what the district needs in that year by abating the debt service levy. And so what it would look like if I plug in the numbers is CPI increase of 1.5%. This would be our EAV, 560 million. I'm saying EAV decrease, slight decrease, new property of 4 million. Again, I'm overestimating a little bit what I think our new property is going to be. Our operating tax rate is going up slightly because our EAV is going down slightly. Our operating tax extension on existing property is going up to 14 million by 1.5%. We get about $100,000 from new property. This is our debt service extension that we, based on our debt service payments we owe, which we get our total extension and our total tax rate. So our total extension would go up 3.5%, driven largely by debt service, and then our total tax rate at 2.7% would go up 4.3%.
When you said on the previous slide that you would abate debt service if possible, do you mean that, okay, there are these unknown variables, so if I set the levy here and we end up with more coming in than we need, then in March we go back, like how does that work?
Yeah, so the levy, again, is a request. It's saying we're asking for the authority to extend a certain amount in taxes. And then in March, when they set the final tax rates, they go back to the districts and say, I think the official deadline is March 15th for debt service abatement, but they're pretty flexible because they always want to give money, accommodate people who want to give money back.
So you could simply reduce the debt service levy request at that point.
Right. In March, when we know exactly how much money we are entitled to based on the law, and we have a better idea of where our contract's going to shake out and where our projections are, and the status of state legislation that could impact our ability to fund education, we can make the decision in the future with a lot more certainty instead of having to make the decision now with less certainty and abate our debt service levy, which would reduce our total tax rate to taxpayers, but still give us the flexibility in the future to increase it back to the level we need to if some of these unknowns happen and we need the money.
Because personnel costs are going to outpace the CPI. If CPI stays at 1.5 or 2%.
We're estimating.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's other things built in there. Some people retire,
Right.
but generally that's a pretty low level of inflation.
Questions?
Is that it?
Yeah.
That's good.
That's helpful.
I was really happy, Jay, and thank you so much for the level of detail and I like sometimes word granularity. You know, it was at a level that I really appreciate, and I just also want to kind of philosophically see how the board feels about that too. Or you guys feel like you're getting the level of detail and this kind of stuff that you need to move forward, and are we instructing Jay to keep going with this level of detail for us, or what do you think?
Absolutely.
That was very helpful.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
And this presentation, along with the extra slide, we need to make sure get on our website.
Thanks, Jay. Okay, so wrapping up item C, moving on to, you're going to stand back up and talk about Senate Bill 16, Jay?
Actually, let me start.
Okay.
Let him breathe for
All
a couple
right.
minutes.
Drink water.
One of the things that our North Shore school districts have been doing is using the template for the School Funding Reform Act, Senate Bill 16. And what Jay did, and it's a draft, is actually put our numbers, change it around a little bit, and set it up for the possibility of us also sending this out to our, what we call our community and our parent list, which is what all the other North Shore districts have done. By doing so, it educates our parents. They can go ahead and send this in to their representatives, and then they'll know at least the number of dollars potentially we would be losing. On top of that, I also put an email that I received from our representative Scott Drury, who will be having a school funding forum on Thursday, October 23rd from 7 to 8:30 at Deerfield High School, which I will be attending. If anybody else is choosing to attend, I'll meet you there. And that's something that we could also add to the flyer in case parents wanted to come to that. So I just wanted your feedback before we sent anything out like that. Make sure that
I will tell you, though I'm opposed to Senate Bill 16, I find this troubling in a lot of ways. I don't think it gives a clear and objective, fully forthcoming picture of what's going on here. So I like the idea of educating our community about the Senate bill. I think we need to work on this and the information contained in this. And, you know, let me give you a couple of examples. First of all, we don't say it, we say that if this becomes law, revenue from state sources will be just 2% of operating revenue. Well, as it is, it's only, we have, I think, 5% of operating revenue comes from state sources. So I think it's a little bit of, you know, propaganda to say that it's just going to be 2%. People might not be understanding that it's only 5 to begin with. It goes down to 2. Similarly, we say that next year we're going to lose $416,000, but actually that, if I'm reading this right, that full amount isn't going to kick in until the 5th year out. So that's not accurate. Again, I'd like to put it in context that $416,000 is on a budget of $15 million. So when we say at the top that this could lead to staff cuts and program cuts, I'm not sure that that is accurate.
We just use the template that
Okay, well, I don't like
That's
the
all
template
this is.
then. I would revisit it. I think we need to educate our community, but I think we need to do it in a way that retains our credibility and isn't sensationalized.
So,
I agree, and I also think that we should have a sort of beginning to the thing explaining the logic for the redistribution. Think about our neighbors to North Chicago, to the extent that the demise accelerate will have some repercussion on our school district. So this, I think that we need to put in a context so it doesn't look like the legislator in Springfield, not that I'm a great fan of these guys, are just taking money away from us for no particular purpose. I think it's important, and to the credibility issue, I think it matters.
so here's what I would propose, and I would like you to react to this, because, like I said, we just use the template that everybody else uses.
Right.
It might be better off just to give the basic information on Senate Bill 16 from the actual wording on the bill, and then talk about the forum that's going to be available on September or October 23rd, and just leave it for right now until we have more information.
Well,
How about that?
I think we can give more information. Jay just gave a lot of information. I think if we take some of this context
Right.
and add it.
Frame it appropriately.
Right.
Impact of the bill on our school system.
Yeah, I would leave out the paragraph about the pension system. That's speculation as well.
Absolutely.
We have no idea what that total might
And
ultimately
talk
be.
about the phase-in too, because people assume that it's going to be immediate, and it's not. It's a phase-in.
I also wonder about just another kind of framing criticism. It talks about, if Senate Bill 16 passes, I would add in its current form, because there's a lot of talk of that changing.
I'll give you the update on that in a minute.
And I think that if there is a pressure point that we would like to have people in the district apply, it should be on a sort of trade-off with the unfunded mandate. I think that I think that a form of that bill is eventually going to pass because it has to pass. But I think that what drives me crazy is when any kind of legislator decides that suddenly they have a bright idea about bullying, discipline, or whatever.
We're going to teach about green triangles at least one day out of the year.
Yeah, the Irish potato famine. Right.
Exactly. I mean, this is, ask for a complete review of all this crazy. Make a list of top 20 unfunded mandates that we want it
That's
to
what was
go.
supposed to be in the
But-
bill originally.
But I think that we have to push this, and if people are going to go to the Scott Drury thing, they have to say, stop this crap, and this is a list that we want to see go.
Jean, I thought you said you'd seen such a list and you were going to try and get it.
That it was taken away.
Okay, I'd love to see that list.
Yes.
Because I think that's a very good point. Maybe there's something that can be done if you can do away with some of the unfunded mandates for the high-functioning
sure.
school districts. That
Let
could be
me
a
push.
nice-
My concern timing-wise is that the session is next week. So I think for us to sit down and get this done in the next, it would have to be 2 days to get it out.
I think
I
we
mean,
have to say much less than we've tried to say.
Yeah,
here.
probably.
I get, maybe that's what I'm trying to get to. I think it would be much less.
Do you want to suggest changes to it?
I mean, I've given you
I
the
think
general.
that it would be
overview on
fair
that.
to put the numbers together, so would be the impact.
And keep it simple.
And keep it
Yeah.
simple,
Yeah.
and what we would like to see is elimination of some unfunded mandates, and
I got
that's
that
it,
down. Provide a context history-wise, talk about the phase-in.
Yeah.
Well, history and number-wise, so people understand that we get 5% of our budget now from state funding, that this would be decreased to 2%, that our budget is 15 or 16.6 million. This will, deprive us $416,000 over the course of 5 years.
So keep it strictly factual, and then that could be the top half, and then the bottom half could be the information on the form.
Right.
All right, I think we can do that. As long as we keep it simple, we can get that done and get it out in a timely fashion. As you know, I was in Springfield last week. The word on the street on Senate Bill 16 is that it is going to pass. It will not be in this session. Most likely it will be going in the spring. That did not surprise any of us. And then they did talk more about, there were a lot of people, especially in this area, that were very upset that we had had the discussions on giving us relief on unfunded mandates. That conversation's coming back up again. So if you're going to do this for us, you're going to take some of our state money, then provide us relief and look at our mandates that we're required to do. That alone is going to be an issue because many of our mandates stem from federal legislation, which can't be messed with. So there was a lot of discussion on that. On a side note, I was extremely disappointed that after booking a whole, well, as soon as we could, I can't say a year, but we booked Rauner and Quinn for gubernatorial, just question and answer, not a debate. They both said, education is one of their leading causes. You've got all the leaders of the state all in one place, very convenient for them. Rauner canceled, he gave I think he gave 18 hours notice. And we got notice from Quinn that morning. And, I was very disappointed. I'm not surprised, but I was very disappointed in that. Especially when you have everybody in the same place. So to wrap up this conversation, I think Jay and I will spend a little bit of time, make it more simple, really. Just provide the basic facts and then attach the information on the forum at the bottom. Which is why I brought it to you. I thought it was important if it's coming up from the district that you see it first.
All right, we are gonna, any other questions on Senate Bill 16?
Can I make a suggestion that we move the agenda to 5C so we can take care of this poor gentleman that has been so patiently waiting for us all evening. So, can I make a motion that we reorganize the agenda and take 5C?
It's just moving your approvals.
All in favor of moving the C to A?
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Approved.
You owe me big.
I don't know if you big an hour ago now.
Yeah. In case you're not aware, Craig is going to be our future architect, hopefully after our vote. Did interview with John and Richard. Has lots of great ideas for us. And as you can see from your packet that I attached before Mark goes into this, I did provide information on why having an architect is important.
But we did discover it's not a legal requirement.
Right.
Which we were kind of under the impression,
That is
leading up to this,
interesting.
it was not something we were required to do.
The memo is in your board packets for that.
Yeah.
John or Rich, you guys have anything you want to raise after having sat through those interviews and share with the board?
No, I think we both stated in the newsletter that we thought it was, the presentations were well thought through and informative, and I didn't have anything else to add to that.
Did anybody have any questions or concerns about the contract, if they had a chance to look at that document?
I didn't look at it. I relied on the attorney for that sort
It's
of
been
thing.
going back and forth between our attorney
Quite
and...
large.
If I was looking at it right, I guess I didn't understand it. And it
Which
seemed
is
to be project-based. And this isn't a project-based relationship, again, if I'm understanding what we're doing here. I thought this was...
Once we have a project.
Right. It's an outline of what we do with projects, but it also takes care of, for instance, one of the first things we're going to have to work on is video surveillance. So we can work with them on helping us determine what cameras to go outside. That's not a decision that Jay and I would be making on our own. They look at the building itself. And
So is the idea that every time we have something we want the architect to do, that we sign a new contract, or we add a new project?
we do another
Exhibit.
project.
And then
To the
there
back
is
of
a
this
fee
contract?
base.
Mhm.
Okay, and the fee is based on the nature of the project.
And the architects are separate, if we care to have them separate from the contractor.
Right.
Correct.
So,
Correct. It's a design.
Which is a good thing.
Right.
So where did this contract come from?
This is in our, well, and it also is it's a contract that Hodges has worked with White for all school districts.
Okay.
So,
So as the attorney of record, nothing really happens
Architect.
other than
Architect.
we add, the architect of record, anything they actually do, that is gonna be a project.
Right.
With a fee, and that's where, I mean, so really that's where the
Right.
important terms are. It's
Right.
not, so this is
Right.
just everybody behaving
Right.
professionally kind of thing, and
This is sort of like.
and it takes,
intent,
you know,
right?
25 pages to say that.
it's
Crazy.
it's a little bit like that, but I also, you know, we don't have to go back out, as I put in the memo. While our attorneys have said there's no legal requirement to maintain an architect of record, it's good to have one because it allows the board to engage in services of an architect anytime without having to go through the selection process for each process that you go through.
But if you had a major project, would you still then be looking at different architects or bidding out somehow? No, you would just, this is.
We're ready to look at our 2 studies and move forward.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it looks to me.
Wait. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Let's say hypothetically, okay, that we're gonna do a $40 million construction project.
Hypothetically. I would say that.
Hypothetical. No, but I mean, you know, hear me out here. So because Craig is the architect, so then we don't bid out that work?
Oh, they
Well,
work with us on the bids for all the work.
No. We don't bid out the architect on a $40 million project?
If it were that big a project, we would. but-
Okay. So the only thing I want to know
renovations.
is that the contract does not preclude us from bidding out for large project. I mean,
Oh, you wouldn't cancel the contract anytime.
Yes. And
all right,
that's
so
The intent is to develop a relationship with the architect so that they get to know our buildings, they can put together our plan and get going on the work that we need to get done.
what would be useful for me, who doesn't like or even cannot really read the things well, would be that you have a cover memo that states the principal terms of this letter of intent or whatever you want to call it, engagement letter or whatever, so we know what it covers, the critical piece, because this is something that
I would have to concur with that. I mean, to me, this contract, it's a form that doesn't seem tailored to the particular circumstance and is really cumbersome for essentially just forming a relationship without the.
This is what all the school districts use with Hodges and White.
Well, and again, I guess you could take it one step further and say, at the end of the day, we can just cancel it anytime anyway. If I got that part of it right, I did look at that 'cause that's one of the more important terms is how do you end it. If you want to end it, and it looks like we can simply end it, so I guess no harm, no foul. We can't
I
try to
would
do it
guess
long.
Craig could probably boil this down to a single letter.
Oh, I would think, yeah.
Quite easily. Is that correct, Craig?
Actually, anytime, that's a.
Microphone?
you have to speak in the microphone.
Otherwise, Herb's gonna come down, and you don't want that.
The AIA contract that you have there really just defines the terms of what our services are, what your expectations are of us, and vice versa, on a very general scale, I guess. So what we would do every time there is a project, whether it's a renovation project, new construction, a report, feasibility study, master plan, whatever it is, we would write a separate proposal for that project, define the cost, the schedule, the general work scope, and then have you act upon that. And then in that proposal, we reference the legal contract that you have.
So there
You know,
is-
in truth, I have to tell you, once the attorneys sign on, we all sign that contract, it goes in a file, and we never look at it again. There will be no reason to do that.
Well, the attorneys always make money.
With any luck, right? We shouldn't be. Well,
Pass this on to Terry, will you?
Right, okay.
But
And that's my understanding of it too.
Okay.
It's sort of apropos of nothing.
And
It's
there was a whole
good faith
part in that
expression.
contract that defines, terminating the relationship. Truthfully, straight up, I really don't know the exact contents of it because we don't do that.
And it was intriguing at the presentation, Rich and I and Gene was in attendance, where you had surveyed the reviews of the buildings that we'd already undertaken and proposed some alternatives looking into the future. So they're getting familiar with the site, gain some knowledge about what the needs are, and over the period of time, whatever we're engaged with, have a better idea where we want to go with this whole thing.
They came in very prepared.
Good. Well, we look forward to working with you.
Yeah.
You know, we approve of the relationship, the contract, maybe not so much, but you know, it is what it is.
Does everybody have enough questions answered to vote on this contract?
Yes.
Yes.
Item 5A, architect of record contract. May I have a motion to approve the contract
5C.
with, we moved it to A.
Oh, we moved it on the agenda. Okay, never mind. Yes.
5C or 5A.
Whatever.
Architect of record contract. May I have a motion to approve the contract with White and Company
So
as
moved.
architect of record for Lake Bluff Elementary School District 65?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call please.
Mark Berry,
Yes.
Leanne Charlo,
Yes.
Julie Gottschall,
Yes.
Richard Haig,
Enthusiastically, yes.
Chris Letchinger, yes. John LaRosa,
Yes.
and Susan Ryder.
Yes.
It is approved. Welcome on board.
Well, on behalf of everybody at White & Company, I want to thank you for inviting us to the district. It's going to be a pleasure partnering with you, and I have to say on a personal level, as an architect, I can't think of anything more important or gratifying than to do what I get to do for kids, and I really am thrilled to be able to make a positive impact with you for the educational experience of your kids. So thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for waiting all this time.
That was your penance.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, sir. Okay, back up to item 5A, personnel report. We have on our agenda tonight a couple of items. One is for an extension of a leave of absence for Anna Groff, who's an 8th grade language arts teacher, effective August 21, 2014, for a 2-week extension totaling out at 12 weeks. She'll be back in the classroom on Friday, November 14th. And the other item is for a certified teacher recommendation of leave of absence for Angela McNicholas, a 7th and 8th grade language arts teacher, effective January 5th through April 7th of 2015. May I have a motion to approve the personnel report for October 14th, 2014 as presented in your packet?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
For Leanne Charlo,
Yes.
Julie Gottschall,
Yes.
Richard Haig,
Aye.
Chris Letchinger, yes. John LaRosa,
Yes.
Susan Ryder,
Yes.
Mark Berry.
Yes. Motion is approved. All right, item 5B, board meeting calendar. Can I have a motion? Well, Jean, you want to talk about the changes to the board calendar?
No.
Very briefly.
Briefly, we made this meeting a special meeting so that we could do some of the approvals, especially on the personnel report that needed to be approved. And we canceled the November 4th meeting.
Great.
Not a big deal. Questions about that?
No.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the revised 2014-2015 board
So
calendar?
moved. So moved.
To delete the November 4th, 2014 committee of the whole meeting.
Who's this second?
Second.
Julie Gottschall.
Yes.
Richard.
Actually, it's for show of hands. I'm not sure.
Show hands. Oh yeah, we can do a voice vote.
But if you want to go
Oh
through
yeah,
that,
no, that's fine, you know.
All
Okay,
in
done?
favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion's approved. Calendar has been revised. Okay, then we have our consent agenda for.
Well, it's the committee meeting
Okay.
minutes, and I think it's important to realize that these are committee meeting minutes only. We do not have quorum, we do not have a quorum for a full meeting. So if you abstain because you're not there, we won't even be able to accept the minutes, and that's really all you're voting on, is accepting the minutes because we had over 2 board members at these meetings.
Okay, are there any, so what we're talking about is a meeting on August 18th, in which we had a policy committee meeting. September 15th, there was a policy committee meeting. And September 26th, there was a superintendent evaluation tool committee meeting. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about those minutes or what went on there? Can I have a motion to accept the minutes as presented by the administration from the meetings as presented?
So moved. Second.
You do a voice for it now.
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion is approved. FOIA request. I don't know if I have that.
Here's a copy.
Okay, we have received, I don't know why I didn't see this, I apologize in advance. So.
It was just for, it was a solicitor type thing for custodial.
Okay, custodial service, so apologies, I have a cold, not thinking clearly. We received this FOIA request from RJB Properties for the current contract for custodial janitorial services and copies of the last 6 months of invoices. And Jay did fill that rather quickly. You have any questions or comments about that? There's no approval there. We then also offer the opportunity to address the board if anybody would like to address the board. There's nobody here other than you guys. If you'd like to address the board, please. If not, we offer
They're
an
not the
opportunity.
public.
But administration and employees can also address the board. Please come to our meetings and address the board if you'd like to. So at 8:57, can I have a motion to adjourn this special board meeting of education for October 14, 2014?
So moved. Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned
In
at
favor.
8:57.
Thank you.
Oh, you set it off? I thought you were back.
No, we take it tomorrow.
I can see that.
Oh,